Well, good morning, everyone. I think we're going to switch over to my PC now, theoretically. There we go. So thank you for the wonderful introduction. I have my own bio slide that I do, so I won't talk about that, but there's my whole history. I will say, though, to the being done by 9:50, I'm an anti-efficiency expert, so keep that in mind as we go forward. I have been in the workplace since, and in fact in technology since before the invention of color film. This is a picture of me at Christie Electric Corporation, a $15 million a year company, the first company that I worked for. I went from being a parts puller in the warehouse to being their head of data processing. And I know I look exactly the same as I did then. Does anybody know how many, what the storage capacity on those removable Winchester disk drives were? We were running a $15 million a year company, 140 megabytes, max, right? Some of them were 95, but 140 megabytes. So the world of work has changed significantly, but a lot of things haven't changed. And we've talked about trends. I started writing, in fact, why we took this picture was because I was writing a piece for the Production Inventory Management Review called the P&IM Fairy Tales, where I wrote these little parables. I was a creative writing major in college, and I started writing articles for trade magazines, and they said, would you mind writing something more creative? And so I did these little parables, and they needed a photo, so I took a bunch of pictures for that. But when we think about the workplace, we've always talked about trends, and that's what trade magazines do. Analysts, trade magazines, et cetera, we talk about trends. I think trends are a bit dangerous because they can often lead you over a cliff if you're watching them, because there are a number of things that are happening, social, economic, technological, environmental, political, that take place. When we look at analysis like this, this is a snapshot in time, right? This is a little scary, right? This is Towers Watson's recent study on people in the workplace. And we wonder why we don't innovate. Why do we have issues with innovation? And I look at these as challenges, not as trends, right? Gee, it sucks that people don't like their workplace, right? 81% of people are not actively looking. 86% want a secure and stable job, and we wonder why we can't innovate because everybody's trying to just stay alive in their job. And then we look at 45% of people are satisfied with their job, which means 55% of us are not satisfied with our work, right? How many of you are satisfied with your job? Raise your hand. How many of you can see your boss from where you were sitting? Right? There you go. I saw a few fingers pointing. You may be in one of the few areas that has some job satisfaction, but it's tough, right? But again, this is not a trend. It's not inevitable that we continue a downward slide, right? I mean, look at these. This is since 1987 when they started this study. Everything is down, right? Job satisfaction, interest in work, job security. We all know job security is up because we've invented all new ways, right? Downsourcing, outsourcing, layoffs, downsizing, right-sizing. We've all new ways of changing people's work relationships, right? And we've completely, I just did some research on the hire to retire cycle, which is in the middle, the great big circle, which is broken, right? The company that asked me to do this said, talk to us about the future of the hire to retire cycle. And I said, the hire to retire cycle is broken. There are a number of entry and exit points that have changed, right? We now hire to outsource, right? We may not plan for that, but we actually do hire to outsource. We contract to hire. We bring in contingent staff and we test them out. And then we bring them into the workforce, right? We also have outtasking, which is a whole new thing, and freelancer.com is amazing to me because the head of freelancer.com thinks that we're going to start working for computers soon. His goal is to get to the point that his system can figure out what's wrong with it, and it will write a specification and post it to its own job site so that somebody can write the code to improve it. That's his goal, right? That's a little scary. So lots of things have changed in the workplace. And let me do a little mental exercise with you. What will the work experience look like in 2021? Now imagine that I'm your boss and asking you that question. We're sitting in a room together. I'm the VP of HR, I'm the CEO, and I've just asked you the question of what will work look like in 2021. And this is what you did. You took all these variables and you wanted to look really smart, because that's your job, right? I am a senior professional at my firm, and I have to be able to answer this question. I have to show that I've thought about this. And the problem is that as much as you've thought about it, you're probably wrong, right? You've precipitated all of these variables down, and you've created this picture that's a good guess. There's nothing wrong with it, except that you didn't ask the big question of I don't know what the context is going to be. You know, under different circumstances, the answer to that question is going to be different. And that's where scenario planning comes in. So I did work at Microsoft called the New World of Work, which came out of a number of exercises that we were doing inside the company about the future of work, right? And these are the 4 scenarios that we did. Proud Tower world of oligopolies and large corporations where people live to work and work to live. Continental drift, where we see a fragmentation of globalization, right? We are told by Thomas Friedman that the world is flat. The world is not flat. The world is a big, fat, lumpy mess. The world could retreat from globalization. He doesn't say that. He said the world is flat. He uses is. It may be flat under certain circumstances. It is. It's wrong, right? Reset, a world where we have a completely devolved economy, where what happened during the 2008 recession actually really precipitates out into multiple long-term economic issues. And then we have Freelance Planet, the world that the millennial generation is taking us kicking and screaming into, where all companies become holding companies and we all end up working for ourselves, right? So that's the speaker's table, right? So, you know, how good are we at forecasting, right? The phonograph is of no commercial value. 640K ought to be enough. Thanks, Bill. There's no reason for the individual to have a computer in their home, right, to the now late Ken Olsen of digital equipment. And this is one of my favorites, the New York Times, October 19th, 1967. By the year 2000, people will work no more than 4 days a week and less than 8 hours a day. With legal holidays and long vacations, this could result in an annual working period of 147 days worked and 218 days off. Is everybody enjoying that? Wow. Biggest industry is tourism. That may be true, more true than we like in the United States. As I was watching people from Brazil last night in the hotel with bags and bags of things from Best Buy because of the weakness of the dollar, they were taking all of our technology from Japan and China and taking it back to Brazil with them. So this all came out in a book called Listening to the Future, and we can talk about that more, but I want to bring that around. So as I was thinking about all of these trends, it struck me over the years from, you know, the picture taken back in 1984 that we needed to rethink the workplace. That there was something fundamentally broken, and I think a lot of it is economics. We don't have a language to talk about the knowledge economy. We've talked about the knowledge economy for some time, but we don't have a good language, and we don't have metrics for understanding how we're evolving into the knowledge economy or even the information age. The problem is that we are still living with Frederick Taylor's industrial age language, and when we measure everything, it looks like a factory. I was listening to people this morning talking about education on MSNBC, and they were talking about, you know, we have to do performance-based measures for teachers. Really? What does that mean, right? How do we think about performance-based measures? When I have a factory, I know how to do that, right? I have quality and I have numbers of things that are coming out, and we treat knowledge economy places, and one of the leading indicators of that is how we think about education. And we haven't even created a way of the almost first knowledge economy job is teaching and learning, and we don't even know how to measure that at this point. So when we think about these futures, we have to think about designing for any future. And this is something that has come over and over in my work experiences, that we have people, we're watching the trends, this is the next big thing, and we do all of our design work around that, and either it gets passed by because we took too long to get there and the trend disappeared, or the trend got derailed, right? So, you know, if you remember the trend back in the early 90s, right, we were going to all have mobile devices. It took us until last year for the Newton to actually work, right? But that was when the Newton came out, that was the trend, was going to be handheld mobile devices, and, you know, that happened, but it took a lot longer than we expected. So I developed this methodology, and I will not go through this here, but this is an overview of the methodology in Management by Design. And we'll talk about that through this case of thinking about how we design meetings. And so does anybody know this guy? Is this experience common? Right? We go to the meeting and somebody just goes, I just kind of threw this together today. I'm glad you could all come. Here, and nobody knows why they're there. They don't know what the expectations were before they had the meeting. They don't know if they were supposed to be prepared for something, right? Sometimes the meetings are a little bit better designed by that, but this is not uncommon, right? And why do we hold a meeting, right? To see people, to show them cool charts, to make the organizer feel important, right? To provide a place to point with a stick or highlight things with a pointer, right? Hold on, I think I have one of those. Let's see, I think I have a pointer someplace on here. Oh, well, oh yeah, there we go. I think I can do, oops. That was not good. That was pretty lame. Anyway, so there's a pointer somewhere on here. Anyway, to feed people and eat donuts, and to impress colleagues with insight and erudition. Right? So that's one set of principles for why we have meetings. Another set of principles for why we have meetings will come out later. But in the methodology, I want us to start thinking about the meeting or the work experience as a design problem. Right? So a meeting is just an example. We have lots of design or lots of work experiences, from how we onboard people to how we share strategy, to how we create projects, to how we do R&D. All of those things are work experiences. And we spend inordinate amounts of time thinking about how we create customer experiences. Right? Think about this event, think about buying a car, think about walking into a Nordstrom or a Bloomingdale's, and think about that experience of the smell and the sound and all that stuff. And then stop looking at what they want you to look at and look behind the counters at where the cosmetic clerks work, right? Or where the facilities people are working inside of those organizations. And it's not the same thing, right? They're not worrying about their smell, their lighting, right? There's cubicle farms sometimes, right? Or just big open spaces, or, badly lit, places with, bad floors and other things, right? So that their feet aren't even comfortable, right? And so as you go through workplaces, and you may do this already naturally given what you do for a living, but think about every place that you go is the experience for the worker, right? And so when we think about meetings, there's a lot of things that we have to balance for. It's the very top of the pyramid for the methodology is what are we balancing? Why are we having these meetings? What are we trying to design for? And what are some of the constraints that we have to think about? Is it about teams or individuals? Is it about tasks or learning? And then we have the kind of rhythm, the variety and emphasis is there's lots of things that we can do. And what is the emphasis? Does everything get 5 minutes and it's all equal? Or do we think about actually broadcasting ahead of time? We're going to spend a lot more time today talking about project status than we do about process feedback or who's new in the organization. But thinking about how we onboard people, how we integrate them into the teams. And then, of course, sometimes things happen as we completely change the balance and we end up with birthdays. Or we end up with this idea of rat holes, right? Which is, we had this whole agenda, but there's a lot of rumors going on about the reorg. And so we spend an entire meeting talking about the reorg that's coming up that nobody in the room knows anything about. But they need to have some communication. And so again, we end up not designing for that. We end up feeling bad because we didn't get any of the work done that we were supposed to do. The agenda went out the window. Now, if we were a good manager, we might say, today we're going to put the agenda aside. I recognize that, communicate that with people, and actually design the experience around the communicated expectation of we are not going to talk about those things. We are going to talk today about the reorg. And I don't even know the answers. So transparency and communication, which will come up. And variety. How do you bring variety into a meeting? Meetings are boring sometimes, right? Most of the time. Most of the time, you don't even need to be in the meeting. And part of the design is, who needs to be in the meeting? Who needs to make decisions? Where do we get information? Do we bring other things in, special topics, toys, other stuff that create some variety and some interest, right? Because when we think about well-designed things, they create interest. I just bought a Cadillac SRX, and every time it comes on, it does some interesting things, and it's completely functionless, but it's kind of cool and keeps me interested in the vehicle, right? Policy and practice. So these are the things that if you're on the wall, when you walk into a conference room, you walk into it and you see a wall with some of these things posted on it in many companies, right? Ensure that you need a meeting, decide who's holding the meeting, be clear in decision-making process, respect time, focus on decisions, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll come up with another one. Now, you guys are going to get a special treat today because as I was doing this presentation, I reread my book and I realized that I said I was going to do something in the book that I did not do, which was rewrite this list at the end of it. So you're going to have the only access to this updated list soon. Rhythm and motion. So the idea of a strategic view, right? A strategic view of how does the meeting fit into the why we're here at this company to do this work, right? And as I said earlier with some of the things that are happening in the workplace, it's no longer just thinking about employees, and that's another fallacy that we have. We were all trained in school to think about how do we create employees, right? How do we manage employees? Not create experiences, but how do we manage employees? And now a lot of the people we work with aren't employees, not ours, right? They're contingent staff. They work for an outsourcer. We've got all kinds of people in the meeting. They may be partners. And we have to create the experiences so that it's about the workers or the people that we have relationships with in that meeting, not necessarily employees. We don't have carrots and sticks for everybody, right? So we have to think about that as well. And so these are some of the things at the strategic level that you have to think about of why are we having this meeting? Broadcasting these, communicating them, making sure that the people in the meeting are well aware, and then asking this big question at the bottom, which is what's the impact? If you can't define an impact for a meeting at the end of a meeting, then why are you having the meeting? Same thing is true of any work experience, right? If the experience that I'm doing with onboarding is simply introducing people to some people that they should know, is that really impactful, or are we actually trying to transfer company culture? Are we trying to communicate social norms? Are we trying to communicate practices so that people are more familiar with how we do work at the place that they have now joined? Right? And so that impact question is important. And then what will change because you had the meeting? And again, if the answer is nothing will change, if we just did a status report, is that really necessary in an age of technology that we sit down in a meeting and do status reports with each other, right? So think about, again, all of those other elements and how do we bring those in. And on each one of these, there is at the center policy, practice, technology, and space. I do not talk in the book about company culture. I do not talk about people. Because my view is that people, those are vague things. We write books, people write books about company culture. I'm not sure I understand when I'm thinking about company culture how to change that. But when I do policy and practice, when there's a policy that you're going to do this, I'm going to use social media for marketing, and these are the constraints around that. That's okay, I get that, right? And if somebody behaves that way, and they follow all those rules, and they reinforce and they have conversations about that, that's a positive reinforcement of a practice. And so I can actually emulate that. I can watch somebody doing it, and it becomes what we might call a bigger piece of company culture, but it's very practical. It's very focused on the behaviors that we're doing and the actions that we're taking. And so each one of those, I apply these modifiers of equitability, simplicity, flexibility, and forgiveness on each one of those. I'll give you a couple of examples. So if we think about space, flexibility, expanding and contracting spaces, open tables, hallways. When I go into many, many companies and I'll see, hallways filled with, old metal cabinets with God knows what sitting on them, usually old PCs, old marketing literature, the manuals from all the meetings that you went to that you don't read the manual because you never open it after the meeting, and you get that and you stick it in the hall because you don't feel really good about throwing it away because someday you may need it. You're never going to need it, right? But you put it out in the hallway and it's sitting there. And that's every day you walk through that. Think about that experience. Every day I walk through the hall and I see this old stuff that's sitting in the hallway, right? And that's just one example, right? Think about your offices. Think about the conference rooms. How well designed are they? Do we have clutter? Is there enough room, but not too much room, right? That's one of the always, again, not something we often think about in design is if we sit in, when we, again, customer experiences, I did a lot of political work back in the early 80s, and we always had a design principle that the television cameras, as they are today, are behind the crowd, because no matter how big the crowd is, it could be 12 people, but if the television cameras are behind them, it looks like the room's full, right? And that was a design principle, right? And you can now watch for that on political broadcasts. But that's, we don't do that. We think, if we walk into a room, we're having a little intimate meeting in the corner of this ginormous room, it's not the same as having a meeting in a right-sized room, right? Equitability, do we have chair and table height widths changes, and thinking about forgiveness. Is the room forgiving to things like spills and returning the room to the way you left it or better, right? Do we think about designing that so that the next people coming into the room actually have a good experience as well? Technology, we think this is simplicity, right? We designed, right? The facilities people actually designed, and we put the stuff in the wires and how many of these actually stay in the room and are not lost or put into somebody's computer bag, right? Not that simple, right? And then we have wireless, right? Think about the design now. This is a new robot, right? So did you design your facilities for these, right? There are literally companies now with robots running around with people's faces on them, right? Going to conference meetings, right? It's not just the like Microsoft Roundtable thing or a Cisco video conferencing system. You've now got people running around in robotic bodies, right? And I've heard stories about, the robot ran over my foot, they cut me off, they couldn't see, there's no peripheral vision, there's all this stuff that we didn't design a regular workplace for, right? But now we have to think, those people are all very intrigued, of course, because those are marketing photos. And then the software. So think about the meeting. I think the software industry has completely abandoned, and I don't care if it's Microsoft or Google or Cisco or whoever, I think they've completely abandoned the real fundamental issues with work design, especially when it comes to meetings, because they've got all these things for having a meeting, but they didn't think about putting in the tools that we use to hold the meeting, right? They don't have brainstorming, voting, prioritization, categorization, meeting evaluation and feedback, workflow, sharing, a central repository, which is sometimes a choice that we fail at, because you may have a SharePoint or a Lotus Domino or something, and then you go to the meeting and everybody's sitting there going, where's the presentation? Oh, what do they say? Let me email it to you right now. What is that all about? Right? That shows a complete lack of forethought, right? And again, it's not designed. If we have these repositories, why is it not, as we create the meeting, we say all the stuff for this meeting is going to be in this place. Please read ahead, right? We don't usually do that. We will say, let's email it to each other. Back channel communications. Some of my best meetings have been spent not listening to the meeting, but talking to the people in the meeting about how sucky the meeting was, right? And virtual attendees, right? Did you design in how you were going to deal with people from other places, right? People that were calling from home, right? I just went out and bought an iPhone 4. I know I'm late to that. Gee. We can take this down to the front. In Seattle, we have people that walk with these signs in front of them and get people to come into housing developments. So, did you design in the virtual meeting experience for people? And I'll come back to that when I talk about the Microsoft case study. Simplicity, right? So there's a list of things about simplicity. Stating objectives. Don't attempt to do too much for the given time. One of the worst offenses that meeting planners do. Oh, we can get this all done, right? And I'm learning that as I'm doing these workshops for people as a consultant that, you can't. There's a lot of things that you have to, and again, you have to design that experience. How much stuff can I do? How much time do people actually need to have the meet and greet ahead of time? What do they feel like when they're cut off? What are we trying to accomplish, right? Setting time limits, organization, et cetera. So the simplicity applied to that. Flexibility, how do you think about integrating new people, new leadership, new practices, new technology? Is the meeting designed to be flexible enough to accommodate change? Because even if trends are dangerous to watch, change is inevitable, and we have to think about how does the meeting evolve over time as reorgs happen and new people join the organization. Equitability. Now, the woman in the front, her handicap is not that she has a man growing out of her head. She actually has poor eyesight, And she's a millennial, right? That is not a handicap, it is a difference. So I was challenged by the head of UK schools at one point to stop thinking about equitability in the same way that most people do, which is strictly in that time it was the digital haves and have-nots, right? The digital divide was a big thing in schools about 5 years ago when we had this conversation. In management by design, I go through a number of equitability things. Again, when we think about the meeting, it's not just people in wheelchairs, it's people with different mental models, different motivations, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different marital statuses, were they adopted or born naturally? All kinds of things happen in the workplace that people bring their context to work. And when we think about equitability, it's not just about race or religion or access, but it's much broader than that. And so we've got people, from the baby boom generation that are sitting in the same room with millennials, and they don't know how to talk to each other, right? The language is sometimes wrong or different, and we have to think about how do we facilitate that. And again, that's a design problem. You have to recognize who's going to be in the room and how you get them to communicate. Right? And then forgiveness. How do we deal with lateness, attendance, bad behavior, co-creation? So this is the policy and practice side. Right? How do we actually think about the forgiveness piece of when we don't actually meet somebody's expectations in a meeting? And we know that ahead of time. We know you're really interested in talking about this today, we can't get to it, and you have that conversation with somebody before you just go at the end of the meeting, sorry, we ran out of time. And perceptibility. So perceptibility, I'll let you read this. Perceptibility is all about the tactical side of communications. So I talked about rhythm and motion being strategic. Why are we having the meeting? What's the impact on the organization? How does it affect the big things that we're trying to do, our strategies? And this is about how do you actually talk to people about what happened in the meeting, right? Think about how does this team work? What are our practices? And how do people even know that you had the meeting and what the results were? Again, it's often very cloistered among the people in the room, and sometimes you put out some very cryptic meeting minutes, but nobody else really knows what happened or had a context for that meeting. And then thinking about how do we report that out. So this is the new list, and I can make this available. I'll make this slide available as well for everybody. This is the part that's not in the book. This was supposed to be in the book. Rules for meeting by design, making sure that you know who's at the meeting, that you've got the right people, and the right people in the room know who they are. I think the technology question is not only does the technology work in the room, but do the people in the room know how to work the technology? Right? That's a big design problem. And believe it or not, Microsoft was very much a company that did, I guess, product release by just mass implementation, right? So you would get an email in your inbox that would just say, you now, after today, have to start using the new version of SharePoint, the beta version, right? That may or may not work perfectly. But after today, that's the only choice you have. There's no training, you have to do that. And so it was very interesting watching meetings take place in those circumstances. And then, of course, you've got the motivation to go to the next meeting, right? Because you haven't designed everything, but that's why we often go to the next meeting, because you feel pressured to do that, right? There is no flexibility to say no. And so we end up having bad meeting after bad meeting. Again, this is just one example of how you apply design to one work experience. And if you think about the meetings that you have, there are multiple kinds of meetings, and so this could be applied in a number of ways. So I want to talk a little bit about the Microsoft Netherlands. As we were doing the New World of Work and using the scenario planning about the future of work, it became very clear that there was a lot of things, again, this convergence of space, policy, practice, and technology. And it was a great test bed for some of these ideas. And the New World of Work came out of the scenario planning. It came out of we don't know what the future of work is going to be, so let's think about it in a very robust way. Let's design in flexibility. And so at the Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam was the Microsoft office, very typical airport building with cubicles. It was literally a cubicle farm. Again, customer experience, the lobby was better, right? There's a little espresso machine and some nice colors and the Microsoft orange, and you got sort of a sense of we're at a professional company. But then you went upstairs and there was just this mass of cubicles with papers all over the place, and the steel cabinets in the hallways with all the old technology, old PCs and old monitors and old books and old marketing literature, and it wasn't a very good experience. Right? The people that worked there went in every day and they did their stuff, but when you had the conversations with them, it was just this is kind of typical what we expect. Right? So we started rethinking it. And what we ended up coming with, because of all the trends and the things that we were watching and the way that we were thinking about the trends in terms of their lack of inevitability, we wanted to create a flexible workspace that kind of, as I said at the beginning, was available to any future, not just a future. And so one of the things that we decided to do was kind of lean toward the freelance planet world, because it's always easier to back off and add controls than it is to take controls away when you've been very draconian and put them in place. So created a very open environment. No one in the Microsoft Netherlands office has an office. There are no assigned seats. In fact, they have changed the thinking of the place to it's no longer the Microsoft office, although that's what some people call it. It is really internally the Microsoft meeting place. It is where people come when they decide that they have to come to a physical location. And they, in fact, stand up there when they're giving customer demos of this facility and point out and talk about the people who are not in the traffic coming into Amsterdam, who are at their homes, preferably at customer sites, adding value, not sitting in traffic and coming to an office. Right? When they do come to the office, though, it is a completely fluid experience. They come in, and if you want a higher bandwidth connection, it's all, of course, wireless. If you want a higher bandwidth connection, you can go to a little locker that has a key in it, and you can put your stuff in the locker, and you can take out an Ethernet cable, which you have to put back at the end of the day, and you can lock your stuff up. But you don't really have a place that is yours here, because the idea is that where you work, the virtual aspect, and they've had to coach people on thinking about owning their own work experience. Right, and teaching managers how to literally not manage butts and seats, right? They had to have consultants come in. Again, from the work experience standpoint, they had to have consultants come in and teach managers how not to worry about employees that weren't at their desk, because they were still shifting toward management by commitment. If I'm getting what I need to do done, and I'm doing it on time with high quality, and the revenues are good, and all the other metrics are good, then who cares where I executed that work, as long as I'm meeting the objectives. Right? And that was a transition. They also, and it's one of the reasons I chose meetings as kind of the hero story and part of the book, is because they brought people in, and they had all the technology. You couldn't ask for more, right? There was Office Live Meeting, there was SharePoint, there were email, and everything else, instant messaging, all the technology was in place. And people started complaining about, well, now that we're not all in the office together, the meetings are really bad. We don't, this meeting experience is not good. And they brought in an outside meeting consultant, and they realized that they didn't know how to hold physical meetings, let alone virtual meetings, right? They didn't have agendas, they didn't have the right, what are we trying to achieve, what's the data that we need to make decisions, who's going to make the decision, how do we communicate the decision, all the stuff that you need to have a good meeting. They didn't have any of that. They would just get together and say, yeah, we're going to have a meeting, and once they started actually designing meetings, they realized that it was a much more positive experience. It didn't really matter where people were, right? And so this is another, very, very highly designed work experience. There's still a few things like cables and stuff that are sitting in there, but these were all designed so they could be easily also taken out, right? So there's not a lot of hidden panels and stuff. You can actually take things out and make it disappear if you want it to. But this was a very, very strong lessons learned for me as I was watching them unfold this work experience and really think about it that way, with their employees being very, very involved, co-creating this experience. Right? This started off as a trailer in the parking lot of the old office, where they built kind of a mock-up and let people go out there and actually sit in the office, take time out of their day and go sit in their future kind of virtual work experience, but was physically implemented, so they could get acclimated to that. Right? And they could give feedback. This is what I'm comfortable with, what I'm not comfortable with. And very, very co-created across hundreds of people, giving feedback and input. And so it was a great learning experience. So management by design captures this whole methodology. If you're interested in the Reader's Digest version, there it is. It's the entire manuscript put into Wordly, and there you go. It's also available for the Kindle. And there's its website. And I will say thank you very much, and I think I've got 3 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
So, any questions? I know it's a lot of stuff, and
So,
on was that just taking the idea that I could actually own and design the meeting and thinking about that. So the next time you call a meeting, some of the things that we talked about, and I know there's a lot of stuff that we went through this morning and I didn't read all the slides, but that changes your experience, right? The second that you start thinking about designing the meeting rather than just letting it happen, and you start taking control, and you start thinking about things like, do these people really need to be in the meeting? What are we trying to accomplish? What's the balance of stuff that's in the meeting? And really going into that process, it changes the way, so for each person, it's going to be a different experience. But as soon as they start thinking in that way, it really changes it. So it's really embracing that concept that I have control and I can design something.
okay.
Is a good starting point.
Okay, one or two more other questions. And where are the mics? Please wait for the mic, and when it, let's go first here and then to you because the mic is close here. So please state your name before you ask your question, and just keep the question brief and directed at Dan.
Yep.
I'm Scott Francisco. You mentioned culture at the beginning and sort of put it off to the side, and I'm just wondering, when does the list and the design intention become acculturated? Like, there are companies that actually do that by second nature through leadership over time.
Yep.
Is not the goal of the design intervention to have something become acculturated, so we don't have to refer to the 20-point list when we have a meeting?
Yes, absolutely. So the question, was about acculturation. What I try to do is avoid actually talking about from the perspective of the book of telling people that this is how you have to change your company culture, right? And talking about all those issues, because my experience has been if the policy and practice change and people behave that way over time, it becomes part of what's known as the company culture. So it's actually the design of the thing that you're going to do, the action you're going to take, precipitated through the behavior, right? So I'm actually doing this now. It's not just written down. It's not just on the wall, and we go, oh yeah, there's that list on the wall. I'm going to ignore that again, right? But you're actually behaving that way. And the number one thing is if you are a manager and you tell people to do this and you don't do it, that is, I had a VP call me once and say, we're trying to do these virtual meetings and we've got all this stuff in SharePoint and this is at this senior level, right? Presidents of Europe, right? European subsidiaries. I can't get them to go to the site. And I said, are you answering their emails about the strategic topics that you're trying to facilitate? Oh, of course, I answer all their emails. I said, stop. You made a design decision that you were going to put all the stuff in a central repository, and you're wondering why nobody's using it. It's because you're still answering their emails, right? Just stop doing that and tell them when they're on the phone or when we're in the meeting, we're going to that site, and if the stuff's not there, we're not talking about it. And this is what my expectation is. And, over the couple of weeks, it caught on pretty quick, right? And so it's the implementation of that behavior. You can do it at the lower level, you can do it, but managers have to do it. Managers have to own acting the way that they're talking to people.
Okay, one quick question from Peter, and then we're going on to the next speaker.
Thanks, Cindy. Peter Miskovich, JLL. You mentioned workplace robotics, and in working with Cisco and others, this issue of telepresence, robotics, next generation collaboration capabilities via technology. Just a quick synopsis of trends and successes and failures that you're seeing in that space.
Well, I'm a little worried about the kind of telepresence stuff because it is so burdensome from the technology standpoint, right? So you have to have these ginormous screens, and whenever you put in that amount of investment, it eliminates some of the flexibility, right? The robots are a little less because they're, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, right? Not much more than a PC in some cases, and if they go away, they go away, right? You don't really miss them, or they just plug into the wall, and. But the telepresence rooms are huge. So I think there's actually, I'm doing some work right now on the flexibility, and it's amazing to me that people are not taking advantage of just the personal cameras. Every laptop that you have and probably every phone you have has video in it. And the telepresence is great because the executives like to look at each other, and you can't pound your chest if you can't see your chest, right? But for working people on a day-to-day basis, just having a voice and image and being able to see facial expressions is enough. And so lighter weight technology, I think, is where that's probably going to go. Probably much to the dismay of people who are doing room-based telepresence systems. But
Okay.
so thank you very much.
That's a great place to end on. Big round for Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you.